Good evening. Can everybody hear me? Great, thank you. Thanks for coming out on such a rainy night. Thank you all for coming. In late fall of 2021, I issued a village-wide notice seeking residents willing to serve on the Mayor St. Paul's Committee. I requested residents with experience in law, finance, architecture, engineering, history, and communications to volunteer. Of all the residents who volunteered, none were excluded. Some committees were formed to address critical issues such as program and use, legal issues, architecture and engineering, construction, finance, history, and communications. The Mayor St. Paul's Committee has spent thousands of hours conducting research, analysis, outreach, and public presentations to determine the potential for adaptive reuse or potential demolition of St. Paul's main building. As a licensed registered architect, I formed a committee to provide information to residents so a vote can be held to determine the fate of St. Paul's. The extraordinary efforts of these subcommittees has resulted in the most comprehensive study of the issues regarding St. Paul's to date by resident volunteers, your neighbors, since its purchase by the Village of Garden City in 1993. An enormous debt of gratitude is owed to all the resident volunteers and their families who gave it their time and expertise. Remember, the volunteers are your neighbors and friends, and they deserve your utmost support in addressing the most difficult issue that has faced our village in the last 30 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Cosmo. Good evening. My name is Frank McDonough. I live on 141 Hampton. Let me make you all take a moment to take a look at the agenda tonight so you understand how we're going to proceed. Each of the committee heads who have been working for the last 15 months will speak tonight, 2 minutes each, to give you a summary of the work they have done. And then the majority of the evening, which should start around 7 o'clock, will be for the Westerman Construction Company, who will describe to you their process of evaluating different scenarios for the development of the St. Paul's main building. At the end of the Westerman presentation, we will describe what the financial aspects of that are on a per taxpayer basis. So you'll see, this is what you get, this is what it costs. Now, is this the final number? No. Is anything final? No. This is an iterative process. So tonight, what we're looking for is your comments. We will then take your comments, incorporate them into a final committee report, which will be presented to the Board of Trustees on this Thursday night. And then the board can do with the report as it sees fit. The committee, under Mayor Cosmo, made a commitment to you that we would respond in an open and transparent manner. When the Westerman team was hired, they told us in 70 days they would have a final report. That's what we're talking about tonight. There will be some adjustments, obviously, based on your questions, that their report can then be made and clarified. But in the interest of getting this to you, as part of the process of having an informed decision on St. Paul, we wanted to move as rapidly as we could. Let's proceed then. Bill Gary, who is responsible for the economic analysis and historical review, is stuck in an airport, and his presentation will be given by Peter Cole, and then we will move through the other topics quite quickly. I'm going to move the microphone over so we're not walking back and forth as much. And then at the end, as I said, we will move to the Westerman report, and then we will have a financial analysis, and then your questions and answers. Okay?
Good evening. Good evening. I'm filling in for Bill, who's focuses on the historic importance of this building. That this building was part of the core buildings in Garden City, starting in this building's 1871. This is the first planned community in the United States, and in and of itself it has that value. The Bill's committee studied the economic impact of preserving a building like this, essentially preserving a building like this, if you were able to put into it activities that would enhance residents' use of the village, use of the village's services, and enhancing activities such as art, athletics, etc. His report contains many studies from which he quotes. You look at those studies, you'll see that rehabbing buildings such as this tend to bring economic advantages to the community and adds to the value of homes. I didn't study those. I suggest you do. I will. Thank you.
What part of the economic review was, in general, in historic areas and with historic buildings, the ability for the homeowner to achieve value is secured depending on the use of the facility. And if you look through those reports, you'll see many of the uses that do add to your home value are things that you would understand. Community centers, athletic facilities, music facilities, academic facilities. All of those are things that have been considered by the committee and are what are called permitted uses. So when you think about the effort that has gone into the St. Paul's program, the bottom line is it is an investment, and that if you're willing to make an investment, you should expect a return. The return that the academic literature talks about is between 3 and 8%. In fact, in many uses, it goes up quite significantly. And so those are the areas that you should pay attention to in the academic research. So the issue of expense versus investment, when we think about the value of your homes that is brought to them by the community park at the south end of the village, where you have a pool, a clubhouse, indoor tennis, these are services that people pay for while your home values are increased. St. Paul's is analogous to that, and on that basis, is more of an investment. And so that's how the committee viewed it. That's what the academic studies indicate, and you can see that throughout all the work. Let's move now to the engineering side and then the architectural side. Joe DeBoer, please.
Good evening, everyone. As I've said in the past town halls, I'll just repeat. The structure right now is stable, it's sound. It will probably outlast all of us as long as nobody touches it. Just kidding. If the roof that they put on is designed as it should have been, then it'll buy us another 4 to 5 years without having any further disintegration, any effect on the structure the way it is. It'll just be fine and happy. The last most important thing is regarding the facadism portion and the impact of that if they do decide to go with that. One of the presentations that I had, we showed the impact of how the building gets cut in half basically, and it would involve a significant structure behind the facade to maintain it as such, number one. But number two, we don't know how the building's going to react when you do actually touch it in that way because of the way it's built. It's a mass type structure. I think we wrote about that in bullet, right? So you could get a little description of how that goes. But that's pretty much it. It's standing, it'll stay standing, it'll take a lot to get rid of. That's it. Will Lees, our chairman.
Hello everyone, I'm sorry, I have a terrible cold, so please bear with me. When we started the architectural committee, the goal was to investigate 3 major options. One was the demolition of the building if it was felt the building was unsafe, unsound in any way, we would demolish the building. The second one was to make an adaptive reuse of that building. And the adaptive reuse was going to be based on the program criteria that would come from the village. What the village wanted to see in that building. The third alternative was really, it came about later, and that had to do with facadism. And all these directions came from the Board of Trustees, ultimately, who we started interim presentations with. So in terms of each one, I'll just briefly touch on what we did. We started with a thorough inspection of the building. My committee is made up of fellow architects, engineers, landscape architect, Bill Kuhl. We have two structural engineers, one guy who's a value engineering nut, he's really good at this. And all of us joined forces. We went to the site, we investigated the building, and we toured it thoroughly. I went up to the clock tower, which was a trial. What we found was a building that was, as Joe DeBoer just mentioned, structurally sound. Any failures, any damage, etc., had to do with moisture penetration from years of neglect and leaks from the coming from the roof. Recently, they've done some cleaning, and you can see the old English Minton tiles. You can see the iron grill work. There's a beautiful skylight over the main chapel stairway. It has a lot of nice architectural features as well. There are some limitations. Basically, because of the structural system that was used in the 1870s, you basically have a masonry load-bearing corridor walls and load-bearing exterior walls. And these you really have to try to work with. So when we took the program information, I had to see what would fit within the confines of this space. And you have approximately 20-foot depths there. And there were some things that the residents had talked about that just didn't work. So for example, there was a lot of requests for an auditorium, and that couldn't go within those 20 feet. It's just not big enough. However, the building is shaped like an E. There's lots of plans back there, you can see it. And there's two areas that are, we call them infills, but there are two garden areas on either side. And if one of them were used for a performing arts center, then so be it. You'd have your auditorium. The other one we thought we could use for a pool. We got a lot of requests for an indoor pool. And we also were investigating an events garden, like an interior courtyard. All these things were kind of hashed out back and forth. There was a lot of discussion on whether a senior center makes sense or not. I know our current senior center is in some difficulty these days, but ultimately what we were entrusted to do was to create an environment that could accommodate a community center with multifunctional rooms. It could be used for anything from Girl Scout meetings to dances or whatever. And we also were going to house a Department of Recreation. They're currently in the cottages. They would have to be relocated to make room for the parking to accommodate the increased parking loads in the building. With that being said, it looked like the east wing and the west wing of the building can be dedicated for future use. And that's a good thing, because if you start phasing the work, it becomes more affordable and easier to plan. And as your needs change over the years, you can adapt it. So you basically have an east wing, a central wing, and a west wing. The east wing and the west wings, we're not anticipating doing any work on right now, except cleaning it up, etc., and maintaining the emergency egress. But the central wing is the one that we're building. In the basement, we put in things such as mechanical, electrical, IT. There's a kitchen down there that we'd like to restore. Upstairs on the ground floor, you have an entrance foyer, and there's exhibit halls, exhibit rooms, as well as these multifunctional rooms we talked about. There's also the old cafeteria in the building, which we thought could become some sort of eatery that would service these functions in the building. And finally, upstairs you have that beautiful chapel, which can be also used for recitals and small functions of that type, and additional multifunctional rooms. This was more in line with, I think Trustee Kelly was the one who suggested that we do a minimal intervention, if you will. We got then from Don McLeod the suggestion for facadism. He voiced interest in doing a turf field of some sort. So with a Moynihan type roof, so that was investigated. We also investigated a brand new building, which was a proposal Mary Flanagan suggested, based on saving the facade and then working behind with a whole new building behind it. Finally, demolition. If the vote comes out in favor of demolition, you can't just leave a hole in the ground. So we investigated what to do with the space, and the suggestion is to build a park. And there's a plan that was done by our landscape architect, Bill Kuehl, in the back. It's just like all these plans, they're all preliminary. None are meant to be final. You'll see spaces that are future, you'll see spaces that are day one, but they're just suggestions. And we needed to do this in order to give Westerman a footprint to price. They had to price something, so we gave them something that we feel is reasonable, logical, and impartial. I think that's all I got for today, so thank you very much.
I'm back again. I am the chair of the legal committee, and I'm a little more conversant with this first topic that I addressed tonight. The building was acquired in 1992, was acquired for municipal recreation purposes. In 2005, the Board of Trustees designated it parkland. The better it designated parkland, the uses to which the property could be put were very limited. They are limited to park recreational activities and activities that would enhance the enjoyment of the park. So that takes away a lot of opportunities that people had suggested in the past. It took away a lot. I don't know if this report contains it, but there were a number of things, activities that people would be pleased possibly to see here, but just weren't available any longer because of the designation of parkland. If you want to go and develop something here that would be outside what would be permitted as parkland, one needs to go to Albany and get approval. That approval typically has a condition that that property devoted to the non-parkland activities be substituted by other property of comparable size, value elsewhere in the village. There's nowhere that you're going to find that piece of property elsewhere. So what we did is everything that had been previously suggested, the Frank's committee reviewed, came through to us as to whether or not it satisfied or met the parkland restrictions or satisfied. And so all of the things that are now proposed as being housed in the building are approved, or are approved. But they are, that's what's going to go in the building. The facade, same thing. If there's a building put behind the facade, the activities that we understand would be housed there would likewise be approved. Demolition is good. If it's demolished, obviously there aren't going to be any activities, but whatever remains there will have to be obviously suitable to parkland. Gardens, park facilities, it just won't be plain grass, most likely. So that's why, if you look at this report, you hear Bill talk, you see the activities or the purposes to which the building might be designated on those charts. Those are the ones that you're allowed. They aren't the ones that you have to go to Albany for. Thank you.
Okay, so what have we heard so far? Well, what we've heard is that there were 37 professionals who spent 15 months taking their decades of experience and trying to apply that to this facility. That's what we heard from the mayor. We heard that structurally the building is sound and that architecturally there are a number of uses for which it can be used. And then we heard that the legal committee has decided that any of the uses that have been in this report report are permitted uses as required under the parkland designation. So now the question becomes, how do you want to use it? And that's my committee. The Programmatic Use Committee's job was to say, what use would we put this building to? Our committee had no view on that matter. What we did do, though, was we researched 30 years of files. And every suggested use was written down, categorized, and then clarified. And 30 years of uses were then put into a schematic in the end of June, so you can see if you used all of the 30 years worth of experience, this is what you would have. Knowing that this was really to do one thing, and what was that? We want to create a baseline that was respectful of all of your predecessors, who said, we want to use it for X, or for Y, or for Girl Scouts, or for swimming, or for a private party land. All of that was put down. And then sifted through the legal committee lens, and that limited the uses to what we then began to look at. What was that? From June through January this year, the Programmatic Use Committee had open hearings, open meetings, and outreach. We reached out to 50 affiliated groups. We had open meetings where several hundred residents came through and said, this is what we would like. So historically, we knew what the residents wanted, and currently we knew what the residents wanted. We asked the Board of Trustees if we could do a survey. They did not fund that. So we did not have a survey to rely on. Could there be in the future? Could be. But our committee was not given that authorization, nor budgeting. So this is what we have. Then what did we do? We said, who are the actual decision makers? The residents? Well, historic and current, we listened to them. And then the Board of Trustees. When we put together the programmatic uses, which you'll see in the report, we took the suggestions made publicly and privately by 3 members of the Board of Trustees and a local political leader. And they were, what would demolition look like? What would a facade with a new building behind it? That was Carter Flanagan. What would a building with a Moynihan Station roof and a covered sport field look like, and a performing arts center? That was Mr. Cloud. And each of those uses we put into the report so that they could be evaluated by the Western Group. None, 0 of the requests of the Programmatic Committee itself were put in here. Okay? So when you look at what's happened, we hope we're showing you that what you wanted to learn, we responded to. Will that change? Of course it will change. Why will it change? Let me give you 2 good examples. We were told the senior center was great. Well, we found out later that it really wasn't, and now it's having to be renovated. We know, for example, that universal pre-K may be coming down the pipe. We know that there is potential for huge amounts of young students coming through. Where do they go? If those were to happen, we would have to go to Albany to get that approved, because that school is not an approved use. Scholastic and enrichment programs like STEM, that's an approved use. That's what the rec department is currently doing. So within the programmatic use committee, we gave what we hope is we have listened to what you've asked of us. And we've listened to the Board of Trustees and other outside individuals as well. That's in the report, and that's what Westman will do. So that's the permitted use. Let me now turn it over to Mr. Westman and his committee, and he will tell you what their job was. At the end of their report, we're going to talk about the financial aspects of that, the cost per taxpayer, and then there'll be questions and answers. Let me introduce you Lloyd Westman and Westman Construction.
Good evening. Thanks, Frank, and thanks for having us here this evening. My name is Lloyd Westerman. I'm the president of Westerman Construction. To my left is Stephen Taylor of Dakota Architecture. To his left is Val Lair, our mechanical engineer, and there are 2 other members of our team who couldn't make it tonight. Gregory Dietrich, who is a historic preservation consultant, and Sean Fennell, who was our structural engineer. All 5 members, including myself, have walked through the buildings and the complex extensively, and we have left no stone unturned. We've been throughout the entire basement, the first floor, the second floor, the third floor, up into each mansard, the clock tower, and it's been a very interesting experience. I just want to say, I'm going to talk briefly about my qualifications for presenting this, and then I'll hand it off to Stephen and to Val, and let them talk briefly about their qualifications. My company has been in business for 30 years. I've been in the construction business in the metropolitan area for 40 years. I've largely worked on large projects in that time, and my company has restored many buildings similar to St. Paul's, and that have been in the same kind of condition, and we've brought them back to life. And in saying that, I want to say that we did not approach our task with the outlook or the viewpoint of endorsing any of the schemes. We tried to look at each one under its own lens and what components it involved and what it would take to accomplish that aspect of the 3 choices that we were charged with budgeting. And that's very important. We were not prejudiced in any one direction at all. In any case, my company's been involved in many of these buildings, and currently we're involved in them. We've, as far as the demolition, I've torn down several buildings in the New York City metropolitan area recently. As far as adaptive reuse, as I just said, I turned buildings that look very similar in this very interesting German Gothic style to various functions, healthcare centers, theaters, etc. And lastly, although I haven't completed a job with restoring and maintaining a facade, I've done many exercises because it is also an option that a lot of people seek, particularly in New York City and Manhattan, to save an interesting facade, but they want to put up a big apartment house behind it or something. And many times people have to go through that cost exercise. So those are my qualifications in approaching this. When we go into the cost aspect of it, I can give you a little more detail about how we derive the cost for this project. I'll hand it off to Stephen who can talk about, actually I should just say the reason why we have an architect and a mechanical engineer is, although you have your committee members, we were charged with creating some details and imagining some functions and what we would need to do to really derive a valid cost estimate. So we weren't just shooting from the hip or saying this should be X dollars per square foot. We actually tried to break it down into its components of what we were trying to anticipate what would be needed for each of the 3 schemes that we were tasked to budget.
Thanks, Lloyd. Thank you, everybody, and I think you've gathered a lot of information, and hopefully we're able to consolidate that information to you. So, my name is Stephen Taylor. I'm principal of Bakota Architecture, and we were brought on the project, as Lloyd had mentioned, to help consolidate the information and assess the building in the sense of what are the components that are needed and required to create a comprehensive financial analysis of the building. As the architecture firm, we didn't provide any design services. I think you guys have done a great job consolidating the information and preparing the design schematics at this point. My firm, we've been around for 7 years, have been practicing for almost 20 years, and a lot of our specialties are coming up with creative solutions, being able to turn a complex problem into reality. So I think that's at this level of where you guys have been working on the program and the problem-solving aspects of it, and now how that problem becomes a sense of reality is the information that we've consolidated towards Westerman and to this committee.
Good evening. My name is Valentine Lair, and the firm is Lair Engineering. We've been in business over 50 years. We've done approximately 23,000 projects in that period of time. And while our headquarters used to be in New York, it's now actually in Mineola, only a few minutes drive from here. We have worked all over the world. world, and have currently offices in Australia and associate firms elsewhere in Europe and Asia. And we've worked on all sorts of projects, including two of the world's tallest buildings. And in addition, we've done a lot of historic buildings and buildings like this that need to be rehabilitated and repurposed. So we've looked at the electromechanical aspects of the building, and then we've gone further and said, what would you have to do in order to meet the objectives of the various alternatives which were posed to us? And hopefully you'll understand it a little better when I give my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Val. And I wanted to add, I forgot to mention this, that I worked with all of my team members on many projects. So it wasn't people I just found on the train platform and cobbled together for this event. Steve and I'm working very closely with currently and Val on historic restoration projects, and I've worked with Gregory Dietrich, our historic preservation consultant, on a big adaptive reuse project in Queens, and Sean Fennell has provided structural support for my company for many years. So we all thought in the same way as how we were approaching it. So we have a PowerPoint, but I think a lot of the things have already been covered here, so I'll go through this fairly quickly. This is obviously the building. I'm sorry. And there are some images of the inside of the building. I'm pretty sure most of you are familiar. There have been lots and lots of documents posted on the village's website, which has an excellent is an excellent resource for documenting the building. This just summarizes visually what we would do if you had to demolish it, which is pretty much the way we would be demolishing it. Adaptive reuse and facadism. We had pros and cons for demolition, and so our thinking was the benefits of demolition are a safe environment is created for the village of Garden City. The village can use funds currently allocated to maintaining the dilapidated structure for other municipal areas. Additional park area can be developed in place of the St. Paul's complex. The disadvantage are the loss of a building would be removal of an original important component of the village history. The cost to demolish and construct a new building may be very expensive over a long period of time. And when we use this word prohibitive, we mean that if that was occurring at one instant, it would be a shock. But obviously everything the village would do would be over a phased period in any case. Air contaminants, when you're demolishing the building to the fields, the field house might prevent the fields from being used during the demolition process, that kind of thing. The village will continue to incur costs for the storage of the salvaged architectural features, and I should touch upon that. So the complex, St. Paul's complex, is in the Stewart National Register of Historic Places. And in order to demolish the building, you could make an argument that it needs to be demolished. Excuse me. But our historic preservation consultant has pretty much stated in writing, and it will be contained in our final report, that you would need to salvage key architectural components of the exterior building and of the interior building. So we included that in our scope of costing that phase of the work, or that scheme. I'll move on to adaptive reuse. The benefits of adaptive reuse is the historic building is maintained. The building can hold multiple uses in a single structure, which the committee has informed you of. Creative use of space and programming can attract visitors from other areas, and the restoration of the building is most cost effective than demolishing the building and constructing a new facility of a similar size and area. The disadvantages are that over time it can be very expensive. The building would need to be fully restored before adaptive reuse work begins, and that's important. Although the building structurally, I should say, and I think I can speak for my team, when you walk in the building, you feel pretty safe. And I've been in many more terribly dilapidated buildings in New York City, particularly after the 70s, that were abandoned. And this building is not anywhere near that, but there are areas that are very challenged currently and need to be addressed. largely from the fact that it was unheated for many, many years, and there are certain areas where there's water intrusion. So another disadvantage is that the building program may not meet the requirements for the Village of Garden City, but, whatever that is. In the facades, and the benefits are the historic building is visually maintained. The building would be stabilized for future renovation and use or connecting to it. The restoration would allow for more time to determine the next phases of work and program. The disadvantages, again, can be very expensive over a period. In fact, it can be very expensive because in order to do it, you would have to provide a structural support system for just the facade or the first bay, and so the initial cost would be very significant. Excuse me. You would still, that first bay, and I should say we followed the Irwin-Belinsky report, which is in the town records for St. Paul, as a guide to how to deal with the facades, and part of the building is maintained in that. So you're not just holding up the facade with steel. Excuse me. You are saving a first bay of the building, so there's sort of like a minimal shell of a building. So that would have to be refenestrated, heated, maintained. A new steel system would have to be incorporated into that. That can then be connected potentially to another building that would be brought in from behind, so on and so forth. So it's very complicated and very involved. The demolition scheme, we would remove the cottages in addition to the building itself. And this image here at the bottom, you can see would basically show how what would be left after we demo the building, or what we included in our anticipated budget. So we just basically erase the buildings, put clean fill in the foundation hole, remove the foundation, put clean fill in the foundation hole, and plant grass. And any other uses for the village to decide after that. We also included in the demolition scheme removing a lot of the notable interior architectural elements and exterior architectural elements and shipping them to a storage facility in the southwest where it's dry, and this kind of the wood and the stone would benefit from that kind of environment, and presumably they have a lot of open space there, so rent for storing this stuff would be a lot less expensive. This is basically what our vision of what we figured for the budgeting would look like after it was done. My thanks to Stephen who did the Photoshop there. Adaptive reuse, the most important thing about adaptive reuse is that the building would need to be stabilized and saved, and there are significant areas of work that would have to occur. Obviously, it would require extensive facade restoration, which would need scaffolding systems put up around the entire building. A substantial amount of the interior floor joists would need to be removed and replaced. Pretty much the entire inside of the building would have to be largely demolished, with elements of the interior architectural work, again, set aside for reuse once the building was stabilized. And we included all that in our budget. I guess I covered everything. We would then add a new HVAC, or air heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system to, as Will said, the anticipated usable areas of the central core. I don't know if you can see my mouse spinning around, but if you look at the E, it's the center of the E, and the bottom of the center of the E, and that area to the left and the right of it would be pretty much the usable space on the first and second floor initially, and that's what we budgeted. And then the big wings would have to be maintained at 50 degrees so that they're not, won't go below freezing, and that would prevent, if there is any water intrusion, which there shouldn't be, because we also included an extensive re-roofing project to keep the building relatively dry, and that would secure it for a long period of time. This is, I guess you're all familiar with these plans. This is the plan that shows the building with the infill, which could be either a theater or a swimming pool complex. And we put a number to that, not a detailed number. And then these are the other levels. There's a facade. We use these drawings, by the way, to determine our quantities and the dimensions of the building, which was very helpful, and they're very accurate drawings. I pretty much covered the facadism already. I don't think I need to reread these. And then this is what was contained in the Irwin-Belinsky report, and this is basically what we figured. And you can see above the X's, below the X's is the facade. And above the X's is the first bearing wall line that either the engineer mentioned or the architect mentioned that is part of the original structure of the building. And interwoven in that would be a steel structure to stabilize all that. So you'd have this sort of shell of a building. And then the back of that, or the top portion of the U, we figured cladding that with some kind of aluminum and insulated metal panel to keep the building dry for whatever ultimate use you would use it for. And again, as Stephen said, we didn't do any design, but we had to anticipate certain steps to cost. Here's some 3D renderings. Basically, this is what it would look like after the cottages are demolished, and that's what would be left of the facade in our anticipated cost model. And now to the cost. So, these are the three costs. These don't necessarily correspond to other ways the costs are presented. This is our hard construction cost numbers. And demolition, we employed an understanding of the current market. I quantized several demolition projects, both interior and exterior, because we need both, and asbestos abatement. Fortunately, there's not significant asbestos abatement in the building, but there is some abatement, and it is mostly floor tile, things that are not do not currently present a significant hazard. And I also then had some contractors walk through the building and give me numbers. So I would say that our demolition number, including the salvage, is at least for the current market, very accurate. And I think we added an escalation, and if you were to go out to bid on demolition sometime this year, I would hope that the number would come in below that. Adaptive reuse, the first phase, again, we had to make a fair amount of assumptions, both architecturally and mechanically, and the first phase anticipates that the core area, basically where it's blue here, would be utilized but in a very bare way. Exposed gypsum board, painted, a wood floor, lighting, electrical power, heating, ventilation, maybe even air conditioning, and bathrooms and an elevator. And then the rest of the building with extensive restoration work having occurred. And then the wings would be largely denuded. See the ladder-like walls on either side of the corridor, for example, on the right side, those would all be removed, and the floor structure would have to be removed to be repaired universally, and that would be typical of what we figured for the entire project. And then facadism, I pretty much have discussed that already. We figured creating this sort of small U-shaped building that would have one fire stair tower would be sprinkled so that if there was a fire in it, it wouldn't burn down, and the stair tower would just be for municipal access to maintain the building, and it wouldn't really serve, the way this budget represents, not really serving any particular function other than maintaining the facade. And then to that we added some to bring in a structure into the back, which would be your typical sort of modern office park kind of construction you see off the LIE, in this region, and about the same height of the building, metal and glass with a central core, elevators, typical kind of commercial structure. And that's what it would cost on the size, the 100,000 square feet, which is what's being erased. And then this is the summary of our budget by trade code. And then this is the detail, which I'm not going to, I'll spare you going line by line through this since it's late in the evening. And but we've basically captured in quantity. And if we couldn't determine what something was, we would estimate man hours, worker hours, and an hourly rate at the prevailing wage in order to figure out how much that might cost. So, we very few allowances, and I think we captured in a very realistic way all three phases of the work. So in summary, thank you. I guess we'll pass it on to financing options. And thank you for listening to me. I hope I didn't bore you, and hopefully I'll be able to answer your questions.
Thank you, Lloyd, and as I'm sure you can see, what a huge amount of work has gone into this, just to give you a sense of the construction costs associated with the projects. And to remind you, as we said, these were the projects suggested by the Board of Trustees. The Irwin-Belinsky report, which is the building behind the building in facadism, was suggested by Trustee Carter Flanagan. The sports facility behind the facade was suggested by Don McLeod. The minimal community project use was suggested by Trustee Charlie Kelly. And as best we could, we used all of the suggestions from the PDEM group for the demolition piece. I do want to point out something, though. As you look at the summaries, the schedule that we talked to has to be clarified a little bit. On the facade issue, they talk about 52 weeks. Yes, it's 52 weeks, it's accurate, but that's only accurate for the creation of the structure which will hold the facade. The time for the creation of the building behind and the time for the creation of the sports facility behind is not included in those 52 weeks. Is that right, Lloyd? Okay, so when you're looking at that, that has a big impact on the schedule. The other issue is that each of the areas will have to go through each of the three suggested uses, demo, facadism, and community center adaptive reuse, would require an environmental review. The prior environmental review, we have been informed by legal counsel, is not going to be available to be used. It might be included, but a new EIS would be required. A new State Environmental Quality Review Act, SECRA, would be required. And what we are told, if you weren't here at the demolition and facade presentations back in the summer and fall, is that that process of EIS would take somewhere between 3 to 5 years, depending on the litigation associated with it. So there would be a process of developing the report, which could be approximately 18 months, 24 months, and their experience was that it invariably used on the short end for any sort of demolition about 3 years, and if it was a contentious litigation, it could be 5. And so that is part of the schedule as well. Let us bring up now the financing aspect of this. And I'll have Ryan Mulrooney come up and talk about that. I did get a note from Tom O'Brien, who wishes he could be here, but Tom is stuck at an event in the city and wishes everyone well. Ryan?
Good evening, everybody. So we have the raw cost here, and just to outline what's going on, the process to figure out what the cost will be for the residents. This really is step one. What's the cost for each project? What's the cost to demolish the building? What's the cost to reuse the building for a community center? And what is it cost for the facade of the project? Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm Ryan Mulrooney. I have the finance subcommittee. I have about 8, 9 people, I think, now we're working with. and in the subcommittee, all residents, all volunteers. So this is step one. Once we go back and discuss with the community and the Board of Trustees, will come up with a final use and proposal for each project. At that point, we have to estimate the operating and maintenance costs based on what the uses and purposes are of each project. Once we get those estimates, what does it cost to operate it, what does it cost to maintain, what does it cost to insure, that'll be added to the project cost that we have here. And then there's a third part, there's philanthropy, there's grants, there's other things like that, depending on what project we go with, that could also be factored in, that we will explore. And then at the end, you'll have those three different sections of the cost. It'll come out with a net cost per resident. The capital cost, just to give you an idea, different projects are going to be financed in different ways according to New York State municipal law when you issue a public finance plan through a bond issuance. So the capital cost of the demo we saw was just over $17 million. And then if you've seen Bill's plans in the back there for the park and pond facility that would be placed in the building, that estimate is around $15 million for a total of about $32.5 million. Demolition will be financed over a 10-year period. Once again, this will be checked out with bond council when you have a public finance plan, but that is understanding that it's a 10-year finance program, and the park could be financed a little bit longer. But when you take the amount, around $32 million for the demo in the park, and you put it over a term of 10 to 15 years through a general obligation bond, that comes out to around $470 per taxpayer. The facade structure, the one with the building behind it, which was Trustee Carter Flanagan's suggestion, that we went through, it was about $106 million. That could be financed over a 10 to 30 year period, the demolition part, the 10, the new building out to 30, and we put that into a finance plan that came to $1,100 per taxpayer. Mr. McLeod's suggestion of a theater and sports facility behind the facade. Same facade plan, different facility behind it, a little bit more involved in the ceiling that we heard about and the program use. Would come to just over $126 million, and that would also be financed over a 10 to 30 year period, 10 for the demo, 30 for the building, and that comes out to $1,260 per resident. And then we had the community center, which Trustee Kelly suggested a minimal concept for the community center. No new additions, not adding anything, just minimal use of what's here and what we went through. And that was $49.5 million. And that over a 30-year period will come out to $385 per resident. Now that's just a project cost. I'll repeat, that's the project cost to do the project. Once the final purpose and use is determined for each one, which is the next step, our committee will work with the village treasurer, the rec department, other people in the village, the finance committee, and we will come up with the operating and maintenance costs, insurance costs, and we'll work that into the numbers, and that'll give us a total cost per average taxpayer. So that will be the next step.
Okay, so we have about an hour left for questions, but just summarizing where we are. This has been a resident-driven process. This has been a process that has tried to be responsive to the Board of Trustees and to residents. And the resulting issues based on the Westerman costs would be for the demolition and the part that we would anticipate the village would want would be $472. For the Mary Carter Flanagan facade, which is the Erwin Berlinski report that you referred to many times publicly and privately, That would be a little over $1,100 per resident per year. The McLeod facade and sports facility was around $1,260 per year. And then the Charlie Kelly Minimalist Community Center, which has no facade, is using the existing building, was around $385 per household. These obviously are still preliminary. There's a lot of work to be done. And the next stage is to hear some of your comments on this. We're now going to turn up the lights a little bit so you can ask some questions of either the committee or of Mr. Westerman's group, and that's going to be moderated by Robert Basalat. So questions for you, and then at the end we will see what other issues there are. All this material will be posted on the website and available.
Good evening. So I'll try to make this fair to get everyone included here. Just state your name and your address.
Steve Maloney, what was the value used for the average household?
The value for the average household. What was the value for the average household at a trade basis?
It's the average taxpayer.
Just in the preliminary, when we split it out, was just by pure number. It's not by your household, you know, if it's worth $2 million or $800,000. That will be once we get the final number. We're just trying to give you a rough estimate of, if you're an average household, you know, just based on the number of taxpayers in the village, that's what the cost would be. Be a little bit more involved once we get the final numbers, but we're really not there. Just trying to give you a broad idea of where the numbers are for each project.
Yeah, Thomas Ryan, 51 Pearl Terrace. Mr. Weissman, in your report you mentioned demolition is $17 million. But yet we heard that it was $15 million for a park. Was that in your report?
No, the demolition was just to take the building, the St. Paul's building down, the cottages down, and then to remove the foundation, put clean fill in there, and plant grass. That's what we figured.
So do you know where the $15 million came from for the park? Because you're going to put the grass it all over and everything like that. But so I mean, it would look like a park. Not maybe not a very great one, but it would look like a park.
I'm reminded of the Lord Ashton who said, "Oh, you failed the lessons of history. I'll force to repeat them." How many of you remember the Garden City Hotel? How many of you remember going through just about what we're going through now to discuss the hotel and how we really couldn't tear down this landmark? Well, we didn't have to tear it down; it virtually fell down, and I fear that's what's going to happen here.
Tom, just to the $15 million is the estimate for the park program. If you see it's back there that the landscaper came up with. It's a pond and park. Look back there on the way out. It's $17 million to demolish it, and as you said, flatten it, clean it up. The $15 million would be for landscaping for that pond concept. Now, the village reaction is, I don't want to spend $15 million and I just want a piece of grass. That's a conversation for the village to have. But the way we understood it from the community feedback, that if it was demolished, people just didn't want a square of land. They wanted a walking park, a pond, landscaping, and that was what the Use and Purpose Committee received as input from the village. The village might say, we just want grass and nothing else. That would be up to the village and the feedback.
Numbers up there. You did it with facades, you put the two numbers down.
Yeah, the only reason why they did not do a landscaping report for, you know, so it was a separate estimate. But I get your point. Question was, whose estimate was it?
I'll address that. We actually were trying to have an estimator do an estimate of my design for the park, and they, for whatever reason, did not respond. I gave them over a month and a half. So we came up with an estimate of about $15 million to do this park because it was supposed to be a first-class park. There's a tremendous amount of unknowns on the site itself. We're going to have to install storm drainage. There's going to be new lighting. We obviously wanted to use great materials to do this, so it became a real community resource. So there are a lot of unknowns, and we put that in there as based on the parks I've done in the past around the country. That seemed like a reasonable number to put in, trying to anticipate what some of the problems might be when we got into more detail on the site.
And as soon as you get your report, we'll post it on the website.
One thing, I mean, just like the lake, the little pond I put in there, it's not going to be that big, so you're going to have some kind of aeration system in there. So there's a number of these factors that go into this that aren't obvious in general, but those would have to be considered if this became a decision that everybody wanted to go with. There's more detail that would have to go into there. Thank you.
I think we wanted a response on the building.
You're worried it's going to fall down. Who is that? It's going to outlast the living together. It will outlast both of us, trust me. It's a very sturdy building. 1800 construction, goes to Great Britain. I just was speaking with our boss earlier. I happened to be watching Harry Potter yesterday. And I'm serious, at the end of Harry Potter, they show a school. And if you saw the photograph of the school, it's St. Pancras train station. That is St. Paul's. It's the spitting image. It was built in the 1800s. They renovated it. They wanted to tear it down, so on and so forth. But the building wasn't going anywhere. So if you just leave it along the way it is and it stays pretty much dry, will there be some more decay? Yes, there will. But it's not going to go anywhere right away. It'll take a long time for it to fall down.
Yes, I was around for the hotel, and I don't think that's accurate. Having been through that building, having worked for the contractor who did that building, there were parts of the building that were structurally unsound in the gambrel roof. And the private entity who owned that used that as a reason to tear down the entire building. The building was not falling down. It was the story at the time, promoted by the private owner so he could get the building removed. But architecturally, structurally, the McKim and White structure back in 1970 would be here today with a significant amount of roof work, but not a significant amount of building work. Same style, same stuff. So I appreciate you remembering what the rumors were at that time and put out by the private developer, but they were not accurate.
My name is Ann Paulson. I'm confused a little bit about the adaptive reuse phase one. I understand only part of the building would be adapted at the moment. But I also don't understand with the facadism why we're estimating the additional square footage to be 100,000 square feet. Isn't that negotiable? If we adapt the building and then part of the building is demolished, isn't that a possibility? Sure. Or are they keeping the full amount of? I'm thinking about the east structure of the building.
Right.
Do we need the two pieces coming out on the sides? And I don't see anything in any of the drawing renderings for parking for handicapped people. That was a problem a couple of years ago when the issue was raised. I don't see enough parking for the use of the building for many different reasons. So I think that that's something that would have to be addressed. And once the building is used and opened, There's going to be a cost to maintain it in its opening, having security and other people who are going to have to be employed. That's not included in this report at all. What will be the cost to the building to maintain it once? It can't be decided now, I understand, because how you're going to decide what we're going to do with it. But if there were to be a building, we have to understand it's going to be ongoing costs.
So which of the 12 questions would you like to answer first?
I had to build a building for my school, so I understand that
Okay,
there
so
are many, many
let's
things
talk about
that have to go on, and many
let's talk
decisions
about
that have to be
let's
made.
talk in reverse order. Yes, parking is an issue, and if you were at any of the earlier town halls, you'll see that parking was addressed for each of those. So thank you for that. And there was an issue of handicap parking, that too was addressed. On the issue of O&M, yes, as you saw what Ryan had suggested, O&M is something that has to be determined based on the use that's there. So that's your second question. On your other question, which was, what about the building and a whole building behind it? That's a very good question, but remember, we were responding to trustees, and Trustee Carter Flanagan, on 3 or 4 public board meetings, raised the Irwin and Belinsky report, said that this was something that she had a very real interest in. What you heard from Westerman is they used that as the basis for their analysis. Wasn't our analysis, wasn't our suggestion, her request. Similarly, Trustee Kelly said, I want the minimum use. That's what we responded to, which was the south facade, the main corridor, and what could we put in there. That was done. But what Trustee Kelly was looking to do was to phase the project in much like the community center at an affordable cost. 384 was the number that we came up with, and for a variety of reasons, the cost on demo was around 400. Okay? If you just want to have a grass on top and get a bag of Scott lawn fertilizer and throw that around for 15 million, you can do that too, but that's a decision. And that is spent over 10 years. 10 years after the environmental process. And I think those were all of your questions. Did I answer all of them? But those are good questions, and we will try and clarify that in the report. So thank you for that.
Gordon Keith on Monroe Street. My question has to do with process. Once the residents of Garden City vote on one of these 3 proposals, will you be coming back to us for the bonding issue, or that is going to be determined by bond?
Would you repeat that?
So when the process is finalized, will we get a chance to hear about the bond? And I believe there has to be a bond vote, no?
Let me go over that schedule again. So that's a very important question. What's the schedule? We will take all of your comments and incorporate them in the report we give Thursday night to the Board of Trustees. They will then decide what they want to do with the report, something or nothing. The FABGC platform upon which all of this is based, the Mary Carter Flanagan request, the Donna Cloud request, the Trustee Kelly request, all FABGC for their platform, that's what we responded to. When and if they ask for a referendum, that will take place at some time that they determine, and hopefully there will be some refinement. Thereafter, depending on what happens, there will be an environmental impact statement that could last anywhere from 8 to 24 months, potentially longer, plus litigation on that, which could be another period of years, depending on which path they pursue. At that time, somewhere in year 2 to 5, there would then be a general obligation bond of vote. That by the village residents. So the village residents get 2 opportunities to have their voice heard. 1 on the referendum, and 2, if you want to pay for it. So you can go through this process and still lose the general obligation vote, and then you'll be back to square one. Did that help your question? Good, thank you.
Hi, my name is Eileen Reed, 125 Nassau Boulevard. My question is, I think a lot of the elderly people in the town want the demolition to be the cheapest option. And I've heard from the architects and whatnot that this is a very sound building, and that it's going to, I'm imagining that it actually might cost more and take a longer time. And I was curious if they have any comparable projects that they've worked on, that they've actually taken it down, how long it's taken, what the air quality issues were, how long will the fields be out of use, will the kids be able to play on the fields, whatnot. I'm not sure if this is all going in hand with what this gentleman asked about the second vote, which would have to do with, you know, possible litigation or all those other things that he mentioned. But I'm just wondering if this is actually a lowball number, because we don't know how long or how hard it will be to take this building out if it's so structurally built.
Address that. So I consulted with an exterior-based building demolition contractor who does a tremendous amount of work in New York City, and it's not uncommon at all that 20 or 30-story buildings are taken down in residential neighborhoods between other buildings, and there's all kinds of protocols, principally just keeping the site damp to keep the dust from migrating. There would be a fair amount of noise, but usually I would estimate that a building like this would come down in 2 to 3 months, somewhere in that range. It's not going to drag on forever. And there shouldn't be any surprises. As structurally sound as it is, it's a masonry structure. Masonry structures tend to come apart very easily, very neatly. So I don't know, I can't comment on whether, the fields could be used during that time, but I don't think it would impose any hazards to the surrounding areas.
Hi, my name is Monica Kiley, and I live on Huntington Road in the Mott section, and I just want to let everybody know that Mary Carter Flanagan, Larry Marciano, and Charlie Kelly are all at a traffic commission meeting that was scheduled earlier than this one. I know that all three of them very much wanted to attend this meeting, but the scheduling didn't work out that way. I want to state for the record also the FAB platform does not name a building proposal. The FAB platform, to my knowledge, is just that village residents should have a vote on have a vote on the proposals and have a voice in the decision that's made. I think a lot of FAB people are for preserving the buildings. Some of them, people have different viewpoints around the community on both sides of our village election. And it's not FAB or not FAB, I personally am for the preserving the building, but of course we all have to get all the information and make a decision. I don't think Mary Flanagan ever proposed a building option. I believe she was referencing a 10 or 11-year-old report that she wanted to call attention to. Mary's not an architect or an engineer. I don't think that she proposed a building. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't go to every meeting, so I might be mistaken.
Okay, your points are very well taken on. I think I can respond on the issue of Mary Flanagan. She spent about a day on the phone with me reviewing the Bellini report. She had issues with it and questions, etc. And we were involved in that process. I took her through it. I gave her my response, my reaction. Any 11-year-old report always has concerns because it's old. And things change and things deteriorate, etc. But she was the one who promoted, looking into this facade. And, I think the first I heard of it came from Don McLeod's suggestion. And based on the Belinsky report, his suggestion, I think she suggested at one point, let's go with a new building behind it. Now, she's not saying this is the answer. It was a proposal. And I think everything up on the screen has merit. Because if we don't investigate all these ideas, we're never going to come up with the best solution for the village. And what we're trying to do is come up with something that's optimal, that will please the greatest amount of people and, give us the best results. And I'm sure that's where Mary must be at. So I shouldn't speak for her, but I think, what I'm saying is reasonable. Okay.
just one other thing to point out that was brought up before is that the committee's not putting anything on the ballot. The committee's not submitting these projects or proposals for a vote. We're submitting this to the trustees, and the trustees are going to decide what's put up for a village vote. So these were the different proposals that different trustees wanted us to look into, and we did. And the trustees will then have to look at a final report and say, the way I understood it, there would be 2 options on the ballot. I think it gets a little tricky when there's 3. But I would hope they just pick the best 2, put them on a ballot, and then the residents vote on those 2.
No, we got it over here.
We got one there. We'll give it to you.
I'm sorry. Hi, I'm Richard Williams. I live on Stewart Avenue. I have 2 questions. One, I came late, so you may have to go back over it briefly. First question is on the pricing of the different options. On the bond, was there a rating of the bond? Did we use a AAA rating? Did we use a AA? What did we use as a basis? That's part A. And part B is what was the interest rate projected over 5 years from now, 6 years from now?
A demolition and a facade project, those would tend to be general obligation bonds, and a demo would be 10 years. The facade project, the demo portion would be Series A, Series B, would be 10 years, and then the facade building would be a 30-year bond. All those would be general obligation bonds. Right now, we have a AAA rating. If you go to the market with a $120 million project, I don't know if that will change the rating. It might. I'm not Moody's or S&P or Fitch, but it's based on the current AAA rates in the municipal market, tax-exempt market. It was end of day March 10th, for the rates that we took. So
what were those rates?
The 10-year, I believe, was around a 250, and the 30-year was a 350. And for the adaptive reuse, that would be a lease revenue bond not issued through the village, is what we propose. It would not be a general obligation bond. Because that would be a lease appropriation bond, you'd probably be talking about a AA rating, not the AAA Garden City rating, but it's backed by the Garden City residents by tax appropriation and lease revenue deal. So that was a AA, so we did account for that, and a 3 3/4 coupon for the adaptive reuse.
Okay, second quick question. That demolition cost of $17 million and the adaptive use of $49 million. Does the $49 million include the 17 for demolition? Or does it include demolition? Is it less? What is the cost of the building after you demo or whatever you've got to take down?
Well, in the adaptive reuse, we're not demolishing anything, so there's no demolition cost.
I'm sorry?
We're not demolishing anything in the adaptive
use. How much of that is to take down what's necessary? Let's put it that way.
In the adaptive reuse?
No. Yes, in the adaptive reuse, yes.
We're not taking anything down.
Are you're taking down walls, you're taking down, that's what I'm asking you.
That's included in the
That's
estimate.
what I was asking. That's all I wanted to know.
Yeah, that's included in the estimate.
I think his question, perhaps, Steve Correa, I think his question probably refers more to facade, because isn't that a combination of building and demolition? So is there a way, perhaps, of breaking that down? Maybe there isn't. That, I think, is maybe a way of framing the question.
It is broken down in the report, if you look into the report, but we will get a one sheet that breaks it all down for you. And we just got this late last week, so we mocked up what we could, but we will break it down. But the demolition cost is included in the both facade numbers. And that's why you have to finance the demolition portion over 10 years. But the facade, the buildings behind the facade, you can finance over 30.
Okay, so it's sort of blended?
Yeah, it's something to do with Series A and Series B, or, there's different ways to structure it. Yeah.
Okay, just, I guess along those lines, I don't see any sort of bond duration for the adaptive reuse.
30 years.
Are you aware of the fact that back before the Irwin report, there was a report by the Committee to Save St. Paul's, and in their PowerPoint it says 15 years. not 30. Are you aware of that?
I am aware of that.
Why are you saying different?
I don't agree with the classification of this building being a Class C building. It's masonry on the outside, stone on the outside, which would at least give it a Class B classification, which gets you to 25 years, but that's only if you do it through a general obligation bond. The readaptive use will not be issued through a general obligation bond.
Good evening. My name is Bob Moros. I'm a member of the Budget and Finance Committee. I see two things up there that I'd like to comment on. Under adaptive reuse, you got a 49 million plus budget on that. Going to the papers here, saying that building would need to be fully restored before adaptive reuse work begins. Now that $49 million applies to what? The restoring of the building in order to have adaptive reuse, or just adaptive reuse, and we still have to shell out money for restoring the building. I doubt very much you can do both for that kind of money. Not everybody is in cost.
I'd answer there was a previous question about the demolition. So in the case of adaptive reuse, look at liken it to surgery. You have to cut your skin to get at whatever the doctor needs to fix inside your body. So obviously there's going to be some interior demolition to get at the parts of the building that need to be restored. Secondly, the entire building does need restoration, and that's all included in our budget. We anticipated a substantial amount of masonry, restoration, re-roofing, and all the things, means and methods necessary to do that work. And that's based on current market knowledge. I'm very much involved in exterior restoration also in the city now, and I use those prices, which I would think would bear here on the island.
I mean, my question is that $49 million applies to what? Just, I mean, you came out with it, we have to do this and that and that. It sounds to me that that number is low. Because in order to, first of all, I don't think we have a reuse as of yet. Secondly, I have yet to hear from the village or anyone that the building has been stabilized. So I don't even know if that's been done. And thirdly, as we say, you have up there as a phase one. Now, phase one usually means there's a phase two and a three, whatever. And each one of them has corresponding costs on it. Is that, in fact, phase one? And what does phase one entail?
So we'll left. Yeah. So if you recall, the area that, first of all, the whole building needs to be stabilized so it can be used. Although the building structurally might be sound now, in order to bring the general public into the building, it needs to be fixed. So that's what we anticipated for the entire building. The areas that would be functionally usable are limited to what was shown on the plans. I can go back to it. The blue areas, if you recall, here. Principally the main square in the middle that you can see there, and then just to the left and the right. Those are where there are parlors now, and I think you can't see my mouse. You see that? So the areas that would be functional are limited to this, and that could actually be meeting rooms, art galleries, whatever you want to use it for. And we figured some bathrooms in this area, an elevator so people could get up and down the building, and then there would be a pair of doors here, and that would be sealed off, and this would not be usable, but it would be stabilized. This would not be usable, but this would be stabilized. And Stephen researched the code and talked about it with our structural engineer, our mechanical engineer, provided a solution to keep and maintain these parts of the building so you could expand into it someday. That was the general thinking. So that would be phase one.
Yeah, all right, so let me, sorry. It's always clever to say phase two, phase three, phase four. Let's address that right now. Phase one, Charlie Kelly, trustee, said what's the minimum that we can have? And what we can have is the first south-facing facade with multi-purpose rooms that can accommodate most, if not all, of the permitted uses that's in the report. That's phase one. Plus the central nave, which is the chapel, the kitchen, the eatery, etc., and also available. So you're talking about approximately probably 50,000 square feet. That's phase one. What's phase two? Whatever future residents would like. We did the Garden City pool in phases. We did a pool first. Did we have covered tennis courts then? No. Did we have fields then? No. Did we have miniature golf then? No. Did we have platform tennis then? No. They came over time. And what this committee was asked to do, in which we did, is provide an affordable option for many of the uses that the residents requested. Some people may not think 384 is affordable. Some people may, but that's average. That means if you have a bigger home, it might be more. If you have a less than big home, it might be less. So it's average. But this is a phased project. No one in this village would do all of the Garden City pools with all of those services and clubhouse in 1 year. We're not doing that, nor did we suggest that here, nor did the board ask us to do that. They asked us to show affordable and service-driven. That's what we've done. And the number speaks for itself. The building is stabilized. We've heard that from this engineer, from 3 or 4 engineering groups in the past. Even the Belinsky report said it was stable. And so stable is one thing, usable is another. And usable in this place is it's accessible on the wings. Everything is fire coded and safety oriented for the entire building. And then in the central nave in the front, that's community use that will be developed over time. And then in phase 2, let me give you an example. If you needed to put in something for universal pre-K, instead of building new schools in the village, that's a possibility, phase 2. There are other phases. But to suggest that this is a requirement is not accurate. What is accurate is phase 1 is a standalone, isolated project that the village residents want. They can get the number that we just proposed, based on the cost that Mr. Weston and his team have developed and the market conditions today. Let me let Will talk.
There's one other issue. This thing was brought up in the past to renovate a part of the building, or a part of the interior of the building. But it was also mentioned that you couldn't get a certificate of occupancy unless the entire building was up to code and code requirements and safety and fire and everything else, all the regulated building regulations that make a building safe for people to enter. So you can't do a part of the building and then mothball the rest of it. You have to do the whole building or none of it.
Excuse me, I think you want to answer this? Why don't you go?
So, to reiterate from these plans, we didn't provide design services. We took, and as the committee has mentioned, history of all the reports done in the past and conversations from the village and various boards and whatnot to create a number for everybody in this room and in this town to understand what the costs are. As you kind of explained, is you wouldn't renovate your bathroom if your ceiling's leaking, or if you didn't have a front door in your house. It doesn't make sense to fix your garage. So this assumption is the building is structurally sound, it needs some work, but in order to come up with a phase for project that the building now actually can have a use, we need to do a basic restoration.
Just a question that the entire building doesn't have to be suitable for a certificate of occupancy. You can seal off areas.
Right, so going down to how the building is programmed, I think that's another question that's going to be delivered.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add was that, again, the building right now, where's that? Where's the laser? Who's got the laser? If you see these lights here, these doorways here, these are existing right now. And the building itself, I don't know if it was phased or why they were added, but these are separate fire zones. And the separate fire zones, you can't do. You can't do what you said we cannot. We can't get a certificate of occupancy for this. The entire building is going to be sealed if that was going to be going forward and secured. And on that basis, there's absolutely no reason why this adaptive reuse option is not plausible. I'm sorry, I'm an architect. Well, I'm an architect. We have to do everything by code. So these are fire-rated doors. It's a sprinkled system. I mean, I don't know what code you're referring to. So
Part of that stabilization is that those areas that are not going to be used will be provided with heat so that you maintain in the winter a temperature of 50 degrees to stop any further degradation. In addition to that, a fire alarm goes in there so that if there is a fire situation, I think there's a alarm that's done by code, and you also have the ability to provide sprinkler fire protection in the space. So in that case, there's no reason why that can't be left empty. It's a finished building, it's stabilized, it's protected, it meets all the code.
Okay, moving on.
Hello, my name is Patricia Chester. I'd like to thank you for all the hard work that you've done on St. Paul's. As you know, myself and my husband have been to every single one of your meetings. I think it's very unfair, Frank, to all of a sudden call these different facades proposals before an election by trustees' name. I think that's very unfair. Prior to this, at every meeting, you used to refer to the facadism as McLeod and the Dawning. All of a sudden, Dawning's dropped and it's now Carter, McLeod, and Kelly. As far as from Mary Carter Flanagan, she is a very, very detailed, analytical person, and she doesn't take anybody's word for anything. So I'm glad to hear she spent practically a day on the phone with Will, because she felt that material was being hidden by, I don't know who, but reports were not put out there, etc. I would like to see the names taken down and the different facadism approaches be referred to as they've always been in the past, either the E, the U, the flat shape, etc. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And, I appreciate the criticism and I accept the criticism, so thank you. But let me just be clear. The purpose of that is to make sure residents know we heard what the Board of Trustees asked us to do. And in that regard, may I finish? Please finish. In that regard, we spend private time with them where they emphasize what they wanted. Now, your allusion to something being hidden is very inappropriate. This has been a report which was in the public files for 10 years, and I sat with her in an hour-and-a-half private meeting where we went through every one of the options in the Malinsky report so that she had an understanding of that. So for you to say that we were hiding this and to imply, as she said from the dais of the Board of Trustees, that somehow or other it was hidden, is a canard, and our committee rejects that because we went through it in a private basis, offered to do it on a public basis, and we have tried to show in this, it's not anything to do with the election, no one is going to be swayed by that, but to show the trustees that we heard them and we listened to them. And if that's not appropriate, I'll take the criticism and we'll remove it. Thank you.
I think it's more important that the trustees, more important that the trustees vote, accept the vote of the residents. They should not, as in the past, some other people have said, oh, I'm going to do what's right, what I think in my heart is right for the village. That's not right. Every trustee that's in office should vote, should accept the vote of the people, and that's the decision. It's the people's decision.
I agree
it's
with
not
you.
the trustees.
I agree with you 100%. But you should know that under the laws of the state of New York, these kind of referendum cannot be used by the trustee to avoid their fiduciary duty. We can have the legal committee tell you that, and they're willing to tell you that. But every one of the trustees, as an oath, has to take their own independent judgment, not use this as a basis for their judgment. They can hear of it, they can use it as part of their contemplation, but they can't say, I voted the way the people told me to, because that's not under their fiduciary obligation. So we have tried to avoid that. But to say that we just pulled these names and things out of the air is really misleading, because we have spent 15 months, untold number of hours, private sessions with the trustees, open sessions where we've had over 50 meetings with public groups, and said, what would you like? Not one of the people on any of the committees, this did not reflect any of their judgment, or rather any of their preferences. So all we tried to do, and again I accept your criticism, that we heard what the trustees wanted in both public sessions, where Mary waived the Belinsky report, and in private sessions where she accessed it, and we took her through it page by page, and Will, Elise, and I did that over Veterans Day in the basement of the library. So we understand your criticism and we accept it. Thank you.
The people that are here are very into St. Paul's. Again, we've been to every meeting that you've had, the public ones, the private ones, etc. The point is, if this is going to be put on a website, it infers by using their name on it that that's the option they're for, and that's not the case at all.
Then we will clarify that this is the option they asked us to research. How's that? Because that's what they did.
It's still inferred that that's the option.
We will clarify that, and I appreciate the criticism.
This is not a private place. This is
Frank, I think in all fairness, just take it off the website. Bruce Chester, I'm sorry. I was going to say anything, but I was letting my wife do that. But again, I reiterate or repeat what she said. The committee has done hard work, and we greatly appreciate all of you that have done the work and time on this. And you know that, and I've been to a number of meetings. But again, by doing that, it seems you're showing that they're for facadism. And they wanted to give you a concept of facadism, but that didn't necessarily mean that that's the direction they were going.
I agree, but don't forget, Bruce, that in every meeting and in private meetings, and for all of the individuals named, they requested an understanding of these options, and that's what we tried to provide them. We did not say they wanted them. We did not say they would vote for them. We're merely saying this was what was requested, and I will make that clear.
Okay, again, make the change on the website.
Mr. McDonough, you used the term affordable more than once tonight. What is an affordable percentage of a tax increase that would make you happy? Our tax law now is about $54 million. So if the annual cost of the building is $5.5 million, you're talking a 10% increase in taxes. I'm not impressed by the cost per household. The easiest way is how much of a tax increase is the percentage of the current tax. What is it, in a show of hands, how many people would accept a tax increase of 10% for St. Paul's? I wouldn't. Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Nick Sullivan. I want to thank the committee for the countless hours that put in. There's a thankless job. My question is about the cost options that you're laying out. It seems like Mary Carter Flanagan and Don McLeod, as far as I know, is not a trustee, and Trustee Kelly, their opinions seem to have carried a lot of weight and are actually represented here. So I'm wondering, are the other trustees supportive of these options, or Do they have, are there other options that are being considered that the other trustees have, considered?
Yeah, I don't think we're here to say the trustees support this plan, endorse this plan, or running on this plan. These were the plans that the trustees asked us to investigate. Now, FDEM asked us to investigate demolition, as a good portion of the village did, and we did. And from my understanding of being in the meetings, people did not want to have a building demolished and have nothing there. They wanted something to replace it, whether that be another building or a park or something that wasn't just grass or an empty lot. That was the feedback we got from the village. The village wants to come back after this meeting and say, we want to knock the building down and we want nothing there, just grass. We could put a number on that. But throughout the last year and a half, the overwhelming amount of people that came and talked about demolition did not want just grass. They wanted something to replace it. Originally, the idea of demo was, we've had past votes. That was always going to be consideration demolition of this building. The other was adaptive reuse. How do we make this a community center? That's what a large amount of residents came. How do we use the building? Can we make it a community center? Can we do this? We investigated all the uses. So that's where that idea came from. It was then over the summer at the board meeting, the trustees asked us to look into the facades. Mr. McLeod, at the meetings of the use committee, and several times online, said, why are we not investigating a sports and theater facility in a facade proposal? Those are the facts. That's how it happened. I'm not here to say that they're for one project or the other. I'm not saying that they're the person behind it and sponsoring it. They asked us to research it. So when somebody comes to me and says, you're on the committee, where did you come up with this idea for a sports facility? I didn't make it up. The committee didn't make it up. Mr. McLeod wanted it. And the trustees wanted it. And FDEM wanted the demolition. And a lot of the community wanted a community center. That's where these ideas came from. And that's all it is. Nobody said that somebody is running for trustee because they support a sports facility behind a facade. But these are the people who asked us to investigate it. And that's what they did. So I'm not sure what the soap opera is about having named a different proposal. These are the people who asked us to investigate it.
Were there no other people that asked for different options? Did the other trustees have an option?
Trustee Kelly, at the meeting we had with, I believe, Trustee Marciano was there, Trustee Kelly was there, Trustee O'Brien, and Trustee Kelly said, I don't want any more of this theater inserts or pool inserts, or I just want to know what can be the minimal use of the existing building. And we said, okay, great. That's what we'll investigate. That's what we'll investigate. We took the trustees, I let the trustees take our lead. We are just residents. We're here volunteering our time. We listened to all the residents, and when the trustees came in, some were not happy in the summer. They let us know they weren't happy, and we took their feedback.
It seems unusual that the options that were selected are, just people that, are...
Trustees.
Well, Don McLeod's not a trustee, right? And he's got the loudest voice.
No, but he's head of the political group that all the trustees are. And if you want to go online over and over and over again, I thought it was a little out of line, some of the names he called the committee. But why aren't we looking into this facility? So you know what? We said, add it to the report. Let's look into it. He thought it was an idea that the residents should at least have an idea what it costs and what it could be, so we did. He is the head of the political party that every trustee is, so his voice does mean something, and other people wanted to look into. Trustee Carter Flanagan wanted to look into, so we did.
But it's also, there are also people that you in public have argued with and have, clear conflict with. So it's unusual that,
I'll be honest with you.
Those are the people that you selected to put in your presentation.
Well, I'll be honest with you. We had how many hundreds of people come to these meetings, and the facade idea was rare. So what's rare? Demolition and a community center, or reuse of a community center. Those are the two prevailing ideas. So I don't know who else. I think we already went through the sports facility one and the town objective. So that's really why it wasn't the two main options we were looking into. Mr. McLeod wanted to look into it, we did. Trustee Flag and Kelly wanted us to look into it. Now, if we did look into it, we might have people here saying, why didn't you look into it?
Well, why didn't you look into more options, right? You know, what about the other trustees? Did they not have opinions on options?
They never requested that we look into a specific option, no.
All right, well, I mean, again, Ryan, it doesn't look good.
Hi guys, I know you spent a tremendous amount of time. I've done it, and it's dreadful, and it's thankless, and oh my God, you're being riddled. You are, truly. But I do have a couple of questions. First, in your benefits, advantages versus disadvantages. Now, as far as the reuse, clearly one of your bullet points was there is a distinct possibility that the cost would be prohibitive. Now, as many of you pointed out during discussions, this is just phase one. Now, as Frank pointed out, and I've told you Frank numerous times, he's pointed out that there are additional phases that go along. And with each of the different phases, what's going to happen is that the prices are going to multiply nicely. Now, back to my question. As far as we're going to round it up and say it's $50 million. Now, the first question I have is it possible? Now, this is a monstrous building, and yes, we've inherited more or less. Is it possible to have a trimmed down structure saying, okay, this is phase one, and then end it there? You say, okay, we've met our obligations, we've contributed $50 million to this whole thing, can we put a pin in it and say we're done? Or, as many of you talked about, you have to actually stabilize, you actually have to heat it, you actually have to cool it throughout the building before you can even do anything. So my first question, and I have several, is that possible? With the material that you have from the building. So, and let me rephrase the question. If I demolish it, can I use the material to build a smaller structure? It'll meet the obligations of the community, we'll have rooms, etc. But this way what's happening is more focused.
So, we responded to an RFP that specifically asked us to figure demolition, adaptive reuse, and what's called facadism. That's what we did. We can speculate all night about all different approaches here, but that's specifically what we addressed here. And with respect to your question about can we put a pin in it, yes, what we figured would stand alone. You just can't use the other parts of the building. The building would be stable and survive for many, many years. Maybe in storage or some other purpose, but you couldn't put the public in there. But you could still, the public could continue to use the areas that are blue here indefinitely.
So I'll take that as a yes. We can literally put a pin in it once it's stabilized and once you install the heating system throughout. The heating systems throughout, the air conditioning throughout, because for whatever happens. Okay, next question. Right now, the difference between your $17 million or $18 million and the $50 million. I asked this question, and I'm sure everybody remembers. Now, is it possible to take that $30 million once you put a pin in that and use that for, I was always pushing to a STEAM program for the high school. Now, we talked about having the property value increase. Now, Garden City High School is a great high school, but it's falling behind. It doesn't have a STEAM program, and there's no plan to have a STEAM program. So my question here is, if we demolish this building and take the $30 million and put it action towards something that would be productive for the kids, would that be a good idea? This way it would directly affect your property. This would directly affect finally putting a finishing touch on St. Paul's, and what will happen is your property value would go up to address this. So I guess that's not a question for you guys, that's one question for you all.
I think you asked a question similar to that prior.
I have.
Tunnels. And as you're aware, we can put in the credit scheme or into the St. Paul's facility or on this land without going to Albany and getting approval both from the education department and the seller.
Understood.
Okay.
That was my question.
So then the question becomes, and maybe you need to talk to that gentleman back there as to, do you want the $30 million to go into your village tax, or do you want to go into your school tax? I don't know what the answer to that is. And that's a decision by everybody here, but you're going to have to pick up the burden. And where do you go?
But my question here is, I understand you have certain limitations that you can't put a school there, or a school function in St. Paul's.
Right.
But the question here is there a possibility of utilizing that $30 million?
I understand it. I assume your hypothetical was you take the $30 million and you go over to Maryland Avenue, where the school is, and you put in a facility or you expand, or you do whatever's necessary with that $30 million. And my only question was, would you rather spend the $30 million over there, or would you rather spend the $30 million? That's a choice.
I think that would be an option for residents.
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate what he said. I mean, you have the building already. Why would you build a different one somewhere else? Oh, because of the certification issue.
I think there's an issue that we have to further explore. If we have a building here that's 2 stories, or it's 4 stories, the 2 stories have been rehabbed, and the other 2 are available for rehab, and you have a functioning building, to go to Albany, to the Department of Education, go to the Assembly and the Senate, and say, now can we use those other 2 floors that are undeveloped right now for an educational purpose? You may be able to get that kind of approval without serious conditions because you have an existing building and it's all ready to go compliant. But if we're going to start from scratch and say we're moving a school into here, that's not going to happen.
Jackie Vita, Plain Street, Garden City. I wanted to thank you all for the wonderful presentation and for the work that was done tonight. But I do have a question because you did raise an issue that I had not considered. You mentioned under the demolition aspect that there could be potential air contamination and the students would not be able to use the playing fields. Yet 2,000 feet away is probably the middle school, and those fields are very often used during the day for athletic purposes, games, and what have you. So I started to think, okay, what happens if the air quality that resulted from any aspect of demolition was contaminated? Does the village have sufficient funds to legally sustain a class action suit or any lawsuits resulting from health care, costs, cancer treatment, etc., if village residents were found to be coming down with some form of contaminated cancer or related. We have residents on Hampton Road, St. Paul's Place, and we have them on Maryland Avenue. They're all in close proximity to this property. So if it has not been discussed, you don't need to disclose that to me tonight, but my concern is I've got my father, my husband, and my son all worked 50 years, 30 years, and now 20 years in construction. I lost my husband from contaminations from working in Manhattan during 9/11. I know firsthand the significant factor of air contamination. I've worked for 30 years in healthcare, legislation, water quality over and over again, constant through the village, through the town, through the county, through the state of New York, water quality, air quality. So I just point that out. It would possibly cause a reverberation at the middle school, with the fields. If anything goes wrong over there, those students, we have to be protected. When I was in 9th grade, I sat and watched the Garden City Hotel be demolished with the windows open in my math class, and we just pushed aside this light dust film from the hotel. Never did I think that I'm sitting here breathing in God knows what from the hotel. But now I'm 65 and I'm a lot smarter. So,
and on that note, we are going to bring. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Betsy Andromedis. I am on the committee, the St. Paul's Committee. I'm the chairperson of communications. I have a question that maybe Cosmo or Mayor, sorry, or Trustee Torino or maybe Trustee Chester could answer. It was my understanding that it's not necessarily a vote. I know it's not a referendum, but it's more of an opinion poll that the trustees really have the vote on what thing is going to be chosen. Is that correct?
Yes, but it's not a simple answer.
And I know you guys promised to let me know what we got.
Okay. My name is Bruce Torino. I'm one of the trustees. I'm also the liaison, or one of the liaisons, to the St. Paul's Committee. Simply stated, each of you, are the guardians of the village and are the ones who will essentially make the determination as to what will happen at St. Paul's. It will not be a referendum. That is not permitted. It will be a vote. And it is, at this point in time, unknown what are the questions that will be on that vote. Right now, what we have to do is have an intelligent and informed compromise on what are the best options. And when I say best options, that will be a very long conversation, both between the trustees as well as securing the input from all of the residents. There were many questions that were asked today, of which the answers that you seek are not known, because the options have not been distilled yet. When you get the answer to the cost, you were given a baseline number, but not a mill rate. A mill rate means that what is the specific number that is applied to your valuation for your house. As it was said, if you have a very expensive house, you will pay more. If you have a less expensive house, you will pay less. What is the phrase? There are lies, there are damn lies, and then there are statistics? Yep. So all of the numbers that you have here are in fact, and will need to be, particularized in general. Some of the trustees, as you heard, had specific questions and desires for the committee to go forward. That is just suggestions by them to others, and the committee has explored those suggestions. Will they in fact be implemented? I don't know. This has not been distilled yet sufficiently. There was a question with regard to whether the trustees will follow the vote blindly. Oh, by the way, that question was directed to me. I know that. So let's clarify that. The vote by the people is the best indication of what should happen at the property. Why would any trustee say, no, I want to go in a different direction and a different path? Oh, come on, guys. For those of us that have taken a vote and taken an oath to follow the law, merely because a platform says we're going to go follow the people, I'm sorry, I may follow exactly what the vote is, but I'm not going to tell you in advance, because that violates my oath. I'm sorry. So in this particular case, I thank everybody for all the input they have given. This is not the end of the journey. This is but our effort to distill down what this committee has done, and they have done a spectacular job. I will probably now get my Tuesday evenings back, because I haven't had them for about 6 months. My wife kind of likes it. But in any event, yes, every question that you have deserves an answer. Are the questions valid? Sometimes, sometimes not. Sometimes the question sounds simple, but it's a really long answer. We now have to distill down to an up or down vote on choices. Ladies and gentlemen, we're getting to the end of the journey. We're all waiting to see the bird that Columbus saw, telling us that there was land. I haven't seen that bird yet, but it's coming. So thank you very much. I appreciate all of your efforts, all of your questions, and most importantly, to the members of the committee, you have done a yeoman's job. Thank you.